4 years ago, on the morning of February 1st, the Myanmar military overthrew the elected civilian government of Aung San Suu Kyi, plunging the country into chaos.
A state of emergency was declared, which has since been extended multiple times. It's due to expire today, but the country's rulers are expected to announce a further extension after joining a Security Council meeting chaired by the military-appointed President Myan Sui and Senior General Min Aung Hlaing.
Well, the military continues to battle armed opposition groups for control of the territory. The UN says the civil war has internally displaced more than 3.5 million people, and it's driving many others across the borders.
ASEAN, under the chairmanship of Malaysia, has asked Myanmar's rulers to prioritize peace over elections. China has brokered an agreement between the junta and one rebel group, but the overall situation in the country remains unstable.
Military rulers say they're still committed to holding elections this year, but opposition groups have already condemned that as a sham, with critics seeing it as a military's strategy to gain legitimacy for the ballot.
We're asking the international community to reject the election, that there will be definitely sham election and a not free and fair election. We need the UN and ASEAN to play a helpful role to find a sustainable solution to the crisis in Myanmar, in line with the will and interests of the people of Myanmar.
We are joined by Jason Tower, country director of Burma at the United States Institute of Peace. Jason, thank you very much for joining us. So with the junta's recent losses and diminished territorial control, some observers have speculated about the possibility of a sudden collapse, like we've seen from Assad regime in Syria late last year. Are we nearing that breaking point for the junta, or is it still too early to predict?
I think that definitely the Myanmar military is on a clear losing trajectory at this point. You've seen where it's lost 2 regional commands to resistance forces. It's losing major airports. Towards the end of last year, it lost the vast majority of the country's valuable rare earth minerals. It's lost most of coastal Rakhine states also towards the latter part of 2024, moving into early 2025. And you saw where it's also lost most of its connectivity to the China border. So in that regard, I think the trajectory is clear that the military is holding a losing hand here. That said, though, I mean, it's getting unprecedented support from the PRC. China had hosted Min Aung Hlaing for a visit in late 2024. This followed by China taking quite aggressive steps to put pressure on ethnic armed organizations to come to the table. And so I think that this has played something of a role of slowing down the pace of the Myanmar military's demise. At the same time, the military continues to perpetrate airstrikes across the country, and that seems to be the main modality that it's using to try to hang on to positions and to deny resistance forces the ability to control territories.
Okay, Jason, so given the current situation, do you expect the Myanmar military to announce yet another extension of the state of emergency today? And if so, how long could this cycle realistically continue?
I think that that's likely. The Myanmar military, though, is under pressure to hold an election. You mentioned the sham elections. It's under pressure, including from neighboring countries, which I believe are increasingly frustrated with the situation that they're seeing with large flows of refugees across borders, with the inability to have normal trade through Myanmar and with Myanmar. For all of Myanmar's neighboring countries, these are big issues. And then along with that, you have these unprecedented problems with human trafficking and with online scamming in the country, with particularly along the border with Thailand, these major challenges with online scam centers that have recently trafficked large numbers of both Chinese nationals as well as nationals from really all across the world. It seems that the Myanmar military's really only pathway that it's articulated for a normalization of the situation has been to hold these sham elections. I mean, the reality is that the Myanmar military has lost control of half of the territories across the country and wouldn't be able to hold elections in those areas. And that's really why I think one of the reasons why you've seen a lot of the resistance actors condemn them. They don't want the Myanmar military coming into their areas. And at the same time, along with that, you have the fact that the Myanmar military perpetrated the coup around the elections, right? So the NLD back in 2020 had a landslide victory. And so from the vantage point of the National Unity Government and from the pro-democracy movement, the notion that Ming Online is going to have a free or fair election, it's just preposterous. So, to this point, that's the main pathway that the military has articulated. It's likely that it will try to hold this sham election in 2025. But you've seen even where ASEAN is now pushing it to look first at pathways to peace rather than focusing in on elections. And I would,
Jason,
note
Jason,
there the ASEAN.
sorry, I just want to go back to the question of China, which you brought up, and you've written about this, a bit. There was a shift, as you wrote, about when it comes to Myanmar. It started as a crackdown on criminal activity in May 2023. That's changed to propping up the military regime since April last year, presumably to prevent its collapse. Now, I'm curious, is that support still there? Is that long-term support? And also, what's been the non-military impact on the ground in Myanmar, from the shift? Particularly, you mentioned this as well, those vast scam operations, that were actually targeted earlier.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. China did pivot in 2024. I think it was surprised in 2023 at the pace at which the Myanmar military was losing major territories, particularly along its border. I think China became concerned that this would undermine its prospects for trade, undermine its prospects for building influence in a very geostrategic space right at the heart of the Indo-Pacific. And so you saw where China really shifted from using a stick strategy, punishing the Myanmar military for, its involvement in protecting these scam syndicates, to using more of a carrot strategy, where it's actually, given open support and legitimacy to the Myanmar military around the scam center issue. In the meantime, it's also focused a lot more on trying to push ahead with ceasefire agreements, lifting that other pressure off the Myanmar military. And I think this is now coming back to haunt China. You saw where throughout 2024, these scam centers, they moved off of the China border, but they moved into the interior of the country, and they moved to the Thai border. And the criminal networks behind them, under the protection, once again, of another one of the Myanmar military's border guard forces, they've become more and more powerful. And you've seen where they've now trafficked a considerable number of Chinese nationals. I think there was even a Chinese police report the last couple of days talking about numbers in the range of 100,000 people under the control of these criminal scam syndicates. But this all really came to a head at the start of the year, when a number of Chinese professionals were trafficked into Myanmar. And I think that, maybe China's now starting to wake up a little bit to the reality that its, failure to continue putting pressure on the Myanmar issue, on this issue, on the Myanmar military on this issue over the last year, has resulted in this problem really ballooning out of control. And this is really, again, something with implications for all of the region.
Absolutely,
said,
which is my next question.
I think it's still likely that China is going to support the Myanmar military going forward, because it is failing to see other options.
Right. Jason, I want to ask you about, the threat to the region and other countries around the world as well. I mean, we can see it's fairly obvious, the threat to China and Thailand, but help us understand, why these activities taking place in Myanmar is also going to threaten even the United States, for example.
Yeah, and here again, I would point to these online scam syndicates. The United States is losing billions of dollars every year to online scamming. There are estimates that as much as $10 to $15 billion is being lost through these scams that are being perpetrated by extremely sophisticated online scam syndicates that are operating largely out of Myanmar, particularly in this space along the Myanmar-Thai border. They are present, of course, elsewhere in the region, but Myanmar is one of the big epicenters of this. So, I mean, when you're thinking about losses of that amount, 5-10 billion US dollars being lost to bad actors, that's something that is a direct threat to US national security. You're also seeing, I think, where patterns in terms of human trafficking are becoming increasingly serious. The online scam syndicates are using forced labor. There's been reference to cyber slaves, which is one way that, unfortunately, these victims are being referred as. But you've got people from across the entire globe at this point who've been tricked into captivity inside of these scam syndicates and forced to perpetrate these online scams. And so this is really impacting the security of every country in the world at this point. Anyone, anywhere can fall victim to trafficking simply by going online and applying for a job. And we're seeing where the modalities of the trafficking are becoming more and more sophisticated. And again, here, there's this recent case of a Chinese actor named Wang Xing, who actually was tricked through a very sophisticated scheme that involved someone who had years of experience working in the film business in China, reaching out to him, offering him a part in a production in Thailand. And, he saw the materials. It looked like it was a legitimate job. And the next thing you know, he's off in Thailand and then trafficked across the border. This is now happening to more and more professionals. And it's really, I think, it illustrates the extent to which this is a major security threat for countries around the globe.
Okay, Jason. So before we let you go, we have a minute on the clock right now. ASEAN, you briefly mentioned, but has faced criticism for its ineffective response to the Myanmar crisis. What more can ASEAN realistically do to influence the situation, especially given its own internal divisions and the lack of consensus among its members?
Yeah, I think that's really the key challenge, is that you don't have a consensus within ASEAN as to what should be done about the situation in Myanmar. You have some countries that seem to be very eager and willing to engage with the Myanmar military at a political level, whereas formally the ASEAN status quo at this point is that it shouldn't be dealing with the Myanmar military. It should be engaging Myanmar in a non-political way. But those divisions, I think, make it difficult for ASEAN to act. That said, I think, there is this notion that like-minded countries in ASEAN that want the body to do more. And here, I think you're seeing we're increasingly under the Malaysia chair. You have Malaysia, you have the Philippines, you have Singapore, you have a number of countries that really, I think, are increasingly worried about the situation and want to take more steps to do something about it. Going back to this issue of online scamming, I mean, I think that this is another reason why, and maybe also something that ASEAN can really focus on, because this is an issue really stemming out of Myanmar, a result of the situation in Myanmar that is impacting all countries across ASEAN, including, having very significant impacts in Malaysia and in Singapore. So, there may be some steps that ASEAN can take to assert more leadership in dealing with these organized crime networks, dealing with the Myanmar military's involvement in this. I think this is going to require significant leadership from Thailand, which is the frontline state. And so, particularly over the last couple of days, with this now starting to have some impacts on tourism in Thailand, you've seen where these cases of trafficking are starting to, I think, send some chills to tourists across the region. Maybe you'll start to see a little bit more in terms of Thailand kind of exerting a leading role here and trying to find ways to deal with some of these problems. But ultimately, until there is an approach that looks at how to deal with the challenges created by the Myanmar military's coup, these problems are going to persist.
Okay.
All right. Understood, Jason. We do have to leave it there for now. Thank you very much for your time as always. Jason Tower is Country Director for Burma at the United States Institute of Peace.